The voting had started an hour ago, and it wasn't going well for Earth. Commander Susan Brooks stood at the metal rail in the center of the Galactic Council chamber and watched red lights spread across the giant screens above her head like a slow-moving infection. One species after another cast the same answer. Guilty. The crystal delegates from Vega flashed red from within their glass-like bodies. The insectoid Zaprins raised their many arms in perfect ritual. The aquatic envoys from Aquarius rippled their fins. Even the peaceful forest creatures from Verdania, beings who had once thanked humanity for restoring half their dying biosphere, lifted their vine-like limbs and voted the same way as everyone else. Guilty. The chamber was so vast that sound seemed to take an extra second to arrive. Thousands of representatives and observers filled the gallery tiers that curved upward into darkness. Some were made of scales, some fur, some mist, some stone, some light, but from where Susan stood they all looked united by the same emotion. Relief. Not hatred. Not even anger. Relief that the species they had spent decades depending on was finally about to be put in its place. That, more than the vote itself, told her everything she needed to know. Beside her, Lieutenant Paul Harrison shifted his weight for what felt like the 100th time. He was young by command standards, brilliant with logistics, and bad at hiding emotion. Susan could hear the fury in the way he breathed. His fingers kept opening and closing at his sides as if he wanted to grab the whole council chamber and shake it until the hypocrisy fell out. "This isn't justice," he whispered. "What crime did we commit? Building too much? Solving too many problems too quickly?" Susan kept her eyes on the screens. Quiet. Paul fell silent, but barely. The words sat inside him like a sealed explosion. At the center of the chamber floated the council speaker, an ancient being of radiant tendrils and translucent mass, like an octopus sculpted from stormlight. Its limbs moved in slow ceremonial patterns as it absorbed the final tallies. Behind it, the last row of lights turned red. Susan did not need a translator to understand the meaning of the room. The verdict had been decided long before this session began. The vote was theater. The purpose of theater was humiliation. "All 212 member species have cast their votes," the speaker said. Its voice rang through the chamber like wind chimes struck during a funeral. Every conversation died. Even the observers in the upper galleries leaned forward. Susan became aware of the cameras again, hovering almost invisibly near the ceiling. Quantum relay drones. Broadcasting live to every human world, every station, every patrol ship, every research outpost, every family sitting around screens waiting to see whether the galaxy still considered them partners. She knew those families. She had walked the streets of New Phoenix beneath alien stars. She had eaten in station cafeterias beside miners, teachers, medics, dockworkers, engineers. She had visited agricultural worlds where human children chased each other between fields grown from dirt shipped across light years from Earth because people wanted something familiar beneath their feet while they built a future in the dark. She had stood inside jump gate cores while technicians in vacuum gear ran checks by hand because they trusted their own eyes more than any automation. Humanity had poured itself into the skeleton of galactic civilization until the bones had learned to beat like a heart. And now those same hands waited to hear what would be done to them. The speaker unfurled two luminous tendrils. Earth stands accused of aggressive expansion, reckless technological acceleration, destabilizing cultural influence, and repeated disturbance of interspecies balance. On all charges, the verdict is unanimous. Paul went rigid. Susan felt it before she saw it, as if anger had changed the air pressure. "The sentence," the speaker continued, "is permanent exile." The word did more than land. It split the room. A visible pulse of reaction rippled through the delegates. Some relaxed. Some stared. Some looked almost disappointed that the humans had not shouted yet. "Earth and all human colonies," the speaker said, "will withdraw from council space. All settlements, stations, outposts, and military assets beyond your home system must be evacuated within one standard cycle. Any human presence discovered in member territory after that deadline will be subject to seizure. Any hostile act during evacuation will provoke immediate collective military response. Upon completion, all jump access to Sol will be sealed. This separation is permanent. One standard cycle." Susan did the conversion automatically. 6 months. 6 months to move 3 billion people scattered across 43 colonies, more than 200 stations and countless mining operations, research platforms, agricultural worlds, relay hubs, shipyards, and trade enclaves woven through thousands of systems. 6 months to uproot a civilization that had been encouraged to spread, invited to build, praised when convenient, and feared the moment it became indispensable. Paul could not contain himself any longer. "That's a death sentence." A hiss ran through the audience. Somewhere in the upper gallery, someone actually flinched as though outrage itself had become evidence. You know Earth can't absorb that population, Paul said louder now. You know our colonies produce the food, materials, and infrastructure that keep billions alive. You aren't exiling us. You're condemning us. Susan reached out and put one hand on his arm. The pressure was light. The message was not. The speaker's tendrils folded inward. The consequences of your species' overextension are not the concern of this council. No, of course not, Susan thought. They never are once the work is done. She stepped forward before Paul could speak again. Thank you for clarifying the terms, she said. Her voice carried cleanly through the chamber. Come. Professional. Almost courteous. That was the first real shock she gave them. The nearest delegates recoiled by fractions. A crystalline ambassador dimmed slightly. An insectoid military observer froze with two arms half raised. The chamber had prepared itself for outrage, accusation, perhaps tears, perhaps threats. That was the story they had told themselves about humanity. Emotional. Unstable. Brilliant, yes, but impulsive. Useful but dangerous. The entire purpose of this tribunal was to demonstrate that order could still restrain invention. Instead they got poise. The people of Earth, Susan continued, accept the Council's decision and will begin preparations immediately. The silence that followed was so complete it almost felt physical. Paul turned his head toward her as if he had misheard. In the galleries, confusion spread like cracks under ice. Aliens shifted, whispered, flashed colors, clicked mandibles, rustled leaves, changed pressure, dimmed and brightened. The vote had been unanimous, but unanimity had not meant confidence. Now that confidence was unraveling in real time, and Susan saw it happen one face at a time. An Altarian ambassador of blue crystal leaned forward until the lights passing through his body fractured into sharp lines across the floor. You accept, he asked. There it was. The question beneath the verdict. Why aren't you fighting? What do you know that we don't? Susan turned slowly and faced the galleries. Beyond the chamber walls, beyond the station itself, beyond the worlds linked through quantum comms, billions of humans were watching. She let that awareness settle into her spine like steel. Of course we accept, she said. She smiled then. Not warmly. Not coldly either. Professionally. That made it worse. You have made your position very clear. Humanity is not welcome in your galaxy. We understand completely. The speaker stirred. Commander Brooks. We will need the official evacuation orders, Susan said, cutting smoothly across it. Sent to every human settlement, station, asset cluster, and transit authority. I assume the Council's records are comprehensive. Another pause. Another small wound. Yes, the speaker said at last. Of course. Excellent. Susan inclined her head with impeccable diplomatic restraint. Then if this session is concluded, we have considerable work ahead of us. 6 months is not a generous timeline. She stepped back from the rail, turned, and walked toward the chamber doors. For half a second no one moved. Then Paul followed. As they crossed the polished floor, Susan could feel thousands of eyes on her back. Fear now. Real fear. The kind that rises when an expected emotional script is broken and a room full of powerful people suddenly realizes they no longer understand the scene they are standing in. Behind her, the chamber began to wake from its stunned paralysis. Murmurs multiplied. Translators hummed. One delegate called out something in a language she did not bother to have rendered. The doors sealed behind them with a heavy metallic finality. Only then did the noise of the council chamber become distant. The corridor outside was long, bright, and empty, lined with banners of member species who liked to speak of unity while outsourcing survival. Paul lasted 5 steps before turning on her. How could you say that? He demanded. Accept? Commander, they just destroyed us. Susan kept walking. No, she said. They think they did. That's not an answer. It's the only one that matters. He moved faster to stay beside her. We have 3 billion people off-world. We have food chains dependent on agricultural colonies, hospital networks dependent on shared infrastructure, transit corridors held together by our gates, power distribution, financial systems, orbital maintenance, climate control, half the Council's border patrol logistics. Yes. He stopped mid-sentence. Susan stopped too and finally looked at him. His anger was still there, but something else had entered it now. He was too smart not to hear the shape of what she had let him list. Paul, she said quietly, who maintains it? He blinked. She waited. Maintains what? All of it. The corridor felt suddenly still. Far away, some station system thrummed behind the walls. It sounded like a machine breathing in its sleep. Paul's face changed. Not all at once. It moved in stages. First confusion. Then calculation. Then the memory of 1,000 reports and maintenance rosters and emergency interventions. The trade routes stabilized by human-built gates. The mixed-species hospitals running on human diagnostics and firmware. The food imports from human agricultural worlds that quietly prevented shortages on planets too proud to call them dependents. The mining chains. The communications relays. The reactor balancing software. The navigation nets. The debt systems and crop models and storm shields and medtech libraries and atmospheric processors and the invisible human labor stitched through all of it. We do, he said. Susan nodded once. Paul stared at her. No. Her smile returned, thinner now, sharper. They want us gone, she said. Fine. The word echoed softly down the corridor. But they never said, she continued, that we had to leave our work behind. Paul's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. They can't be that stupid. Susan glanced back toward the chamber doors. They already were. For the first time since the verdict, Paul stopped looking angry and started looking dangerous. We take it all? Every system we can legally classify as human-built, human-maintained, human-designed, human-funded, or human-secured. Commander, that's half the galaxy. Her eyes did not leave the sealed doors. I know. A beat passed between them, deep and electric. Then Paul gave a single disbelieving breath that might have become laughter in another life. They really thought they were voting to punish us. Susan resumed walking. They were voting to feel safe. He fell into step beside her, mind already moving. She could almost see the logistics trees branching behind his eyes. Fleet requirements. Disassembly priorities. Transport conversion. Population routing. Resource lockouts. Information recovery. Gate deconstruction. Asset ownership records. He was no longer thinking about survival. He was thinking about execution. By the time they reached the diplomatic hangar lifts, his shock had become grim focus. We'll need central coordination, he said. Every colony governor, every station commander, every industrial fleet lead. We need ownership archives pulled immediately before the council starts tampering with records. We'll need legal teams to classify mixed-use infrastructure. And if we're going to strip the gates, we'll need. Susan activated her communicator. A secure channel bloomed to life against her wrist, waiting. Yes, she said. We will. The lift doors opened. Human security staff stood inside, faces pale, eyes searching hers for meaning. They had watched the vote too. They had seen the comm on the broadcast and not understood it yet. That would change in the next 10 minutes. Susan stepped into the lift and turned to face the stars beyond the hangar glass. Somewhere out there, billions of people were waiting to hear whether humanity had just been broken. She opened the first channel. Patch me through to President Garcia, she said. Priority black. The officer at the panel swallowed. At once, Commander. Paul stood beside her as the doors slid shut. The lift began to descend. Susan watched the chamber tower vanish above them and felt, for one brief moment, the full weight of what was coming. It was too large for anger. Too precise for grief. Humanity was about to perform the greatest act of withdrawal in recorded history. Not a retreat. Not a surrender. A lesson. One the galaxy had begged for without understanding the price. Her communicator chimed. The president's face appeared in the air before her, already composed, already listening. Susan did not waste a second. Madam President, she said, the exile is confirmed. Lisa Garcia held her gaze. And? Susan looked out through the lift's transparent wall at the vast station wrapped in light, at docking arms loaded with human cargo vessels, at transit lanes threading through council space like arteries no one had ever imagined could close. Then she smiled that same terrible, polite smile. And they have made the mistake of thinking they can keep the galaxy after they remove the people who built it. President Lisa Garcia stood alone for exactly 12 seconds after the secure transmission ended. Outside the reinforced glass of her office, the lights of United Earth headquarters burned through the night, but inside the room nothing moved. Susan's final sentence still hung in the air like a blade. They have made the mistake of thinking they can keep the galaxy after they remove the people who built it. Lisa let the silence finish its work. Then she turned, walked to her desk, and touched the emergency seal embedded in its surface. Red light spread through the office. Across Earth and every human-controlled world, encrypted channels opened. Priority summons went out to colony governors, fleet admirals, station directors, logistics chiefs, industrial magnates, science leads, agricultural coordinators, and intelligence command. No speeches. No explanations. Just one line. Black assembly. Immediate attendance. Full authority required. Within minutes, the assembly war room beneath Geneva was full. The room had been built during the resource conflicts of the previous century, when humanity had first learned that diplomacy sounded noble right up until supply chains broke. Circular tiers descended toward a central holographic pit. Maps of human space rose into the air as officials took their places around it. 43 colonies burned red. 200 stations flashed blue. Mining belts, trade lanes, medical hubs, gate relays, orbital farms, fuel depots, deep-range observatories, and shipyards glittered across the projection in gold and white. It looked less like territory than nervous system tissue. Lisa stepped to the center platform. No introduction. No ceremonial delay. Everyone here had already seen the vote. "We have 6 months," she said. No one interrupted. That was worse than panic. Panic talked. This was concentration sharpened by insult. The Council has ordered full human withdrawal from member space. Permanent. All colonies, stations, outposts, fleets, and systems beyond Sol are to be vacated before the deadline. They expect us to abandon our infrastructure, collapse inward, and beg for terms. Her voice hardened. That will not happen. A new image replaced the Council chamber feed. Massive transport hulls under construction in lunar orbit. Automated disassembly rigs. Compression storage units. Matter field vaults. A dozen projects no one outside Black Clearance had known were this far along. Gasps didn't echo in the room. They tightened it. "We are initiating Operation Exodus," Lisa said. "We are not abandoning anything. We are taking everything that belongs to us. Every gate, every server core, every atmospheric processor, every agricultural lattice, every line of code, every medical archive, every reactor shell, every banked seed, every industrial tool, every bolt we can prove is ours. If they want a galaxy without humans, then they will have one. A complete one." Admiral Julia Chun leaned forward first. Her face was cut from iron and bad sleep. "Madam President, if we start stripping the gate network, interstellar traffic across half the Council collapses inside weeks." Lisa met her eyes. "Yes." Julia nodded once. Not shock. Acceptance. A soldier receiving permission to do what had already been concluded. Captain Kevin Martinez, patched in from New Phoenix, appeared above the map in blue static. Behind him stretched the skyline of humanity's first colony beyond Sol, 50 million people spread across towers, ports, farmland, and orbital rings. "My world can evacuate civilians," he said. "But if you want the city too, we need dismantling fleets doubled. Roads, reactors, water towers, transport grids, soil retention systems. We're talking about taking a continent apart." "You'll have what you need," Lisa said. "How far does thorough go?" asked Director Gregory Adams from the financial tier. Lisa turned to him. "As far as ownership does." That answer rippled outward. People began reading the shape of the plan all at once. Chief Agricultural Director Sarah Kim spoke next from Harvest Prime, where the galaxy's most productive food world rolled beneath a copper dawn. "The hybrid soil profiles are human-engineered," she said slowly. "The microbial chains too. The irrigation intelligence. The climate-balanced crop sequencing. If we remove all of it, at least 17 member species lose their food stability windows within 90 days. Then they will relearn hunger," Lisa said. No one objected. Not because they had turned cruel in a single hour. Because for the first time, everyone in that room understood the scale of what had always been given away for free. Admiral Nathan Torres rose from the fleet station, broad-shouldered and unreadable. "The Council will monitor evacuation traffic. If we move too aggressively, they may call it sabotage." "They already called our existence sabotage," Lisa replied. "We will operate within their ruling. We leave. We remove human property. We defend our civilians. Nothing more." "And if they interfere?" Nathan asked. The room went still. Lisa looked around at the faces surrounding her. Some angry. Some tired. Some grieving already. None weak. "If they interfere with human evacuation," she said, "they interfere with human survival. And history will record whatever follows as their decision." That settled it. Paul Harrison entered the chamber then, summoned directly from the Council station, his face still carrying the heat of what he had seen. Susan appeared beside him on a secondary feed from the diplomatic hangar. She did not sit. Paul activated a new overlay. The map changed color. Human dependencies glowed white. Alien dependencies on human systems burned violet. The projection became almost blinding. A soft sound passed through the chamber. Not fear. Recognition. Trade routes. Violet. Border stabilization networks. Violet. Medical relay chains. Violet. Orbital weather control over terraformed worlds. Violet. Shared banking architecture. Violet. Jump gate coordination arrays. Violet. Translator mesh services. Violet. Plague monitoring labs. Violet. Agricultural patent strains. Violet. Emergency rescue beacons. Violet. The galaxy was not merely connected to humanity, it was threaded through with it. We ran the dependency model twice, Paul said. Then a third time because nobody believed the first two passes. If we withdraw all human-maintained infrastructure and all human-authored technical systems, 71% of Council transit slows below viable economic speed within a month. 43% of advanced medical systems fail inside 8 weeks. Food volatility spikes across at least 92 worlds by month 3. Their military response coordination falls apart as soon as gate control and translation support go dark. Silence. Then Susan spoke from the feed. They voted unanimous, she said. Make sure the lesson is unanimous too. No one applauded. This was not triumph yet. It was geometry. Lisa expanded the operational layers. Phase 1 begins tonight, she said. Ownership blocks. Data extraction. Legal isolation of mixed systems. Civilian census verification. Prioritized relocation of vulnerable populations. Phase 2 follows within 48 hours. Industrial dismantling begins at all non-essential human assets. Phase 3 is full infrastructure withdrawal. Colony reduction, gate breakdown, and strategic blackout by region. On the map, red arrows began flowing inward from the stars. At Space Station Alpha, Chief Engineer Ryan Cooper got the order while standing in an engineering spine that kept life support stable for 6,000 beings, only 1/3 of them human. He read the directive once, then looked up at his mixed crew. A Zephyron technician raised one trembling arm. What does disconnect all human core systems from non-human sectors mean? Ryan folded the order shut. It means your council got exactly what it asked for. On Harvest Prime, Sarah Kim stood in a field that had fed 12 worlds and drove the first extraction stake into the living ground herself. Dark, rich soil clung to the metal. Human-made bacteria. Human nutrients. Human years. Around her, excavation towers woke like giants. On New Phoenix, Kevin Martinez watched the colony skyline as demolition drones rose in swarms between towers. Not to destroy. To disassemble. Precision cuts glittered in the morning light. Entire buildings would be folded into storage fields and carried away piece by piece. In lunar orbit, shipyards stopped producing warships and began producing something stranger. Transport leviathans. Hulls vast enough to swallow cities once compressed into molecular vaults. Their frames glowed against the black like new skeletons being forged for a civilization preparing to tear up its own roots. Across human space, people cried, cursed, packed, argued, embraced, worked. Children were told they were going on a journey. Engineers worked 30-hour cycles without complaint. Archivists emptied libraries into quantum cores. Doctors copied treatment protocols and then erased them from shared systems. Teachers closed classrooms and handed students travel tags. Farmers uprooted orchards by the square kilometer. Miners collapsed shafts after stripping machines from the rock. Every act hurt because every act mattered. Humanity did not break. It clenched. Late that night, Lisa returned to the surface and stepped onto the assembly balcony. The city below her was alive with motion. Cargo lanes burned in the sky. Emergency broadcasts rolled across public towers. On every continent, factories were staying lit past dawn. Robert Chu approached quietly behind her. Madam President, the Council has requested clarification on our compliance procedures. Lisa did not turn. What exactly did they say? She asked. Robert checked the message pad. They're concerned by reports that we may be removing infrastructure essential to interspecies stability. Only then did Lisa smile. Send them this, she said. Humanity is complying fully and enthusiastically with the Council's ruling. We are ensuring that no trace of human presence remains in member space. Robert hesitated. That will terrify them. Lisa looked up at the cargo lights crossing the dark, each one carrying a fragment of a world that had once believed itself permanent. I know, she said. We're still being polite. By the end of the first month, panic had developed a smell. It lived in council corridors that had once carried only ceremony and perfume. It lingered in translator static, in sleepless emergency sessions, in the clipped voices of species who had never imagined they would need to beg the humans to slow down. The galaxy had expected tears, outrage, perhaps one dramatic act of defiance it could punish publicly. It had not expected method. It had not expected to watch humanity take civilization apart with the same patience it had once used to build it. Ambassador Kyle Thompson enjoyed the silence before he spoke. The emergency council chamber was smaller than the tribunal hall, more intimate and therefore crueler. Delegates crowded around the circular table in visible strain. Crystal forms flickered irregularly. Scaled diplomats had shed stress patterns across their necks. Energy beings pulsed out of rhythm. Several species had brought no aids at all because their transport timetables had already begun to fail. Above them, tactical displays flashed warnings in every known language. Trade delay. Medical disruption. Gate outage. Financial instability. Crop loss forecast. Kyle rested both hands on the table and wore the same calm smile Susan Brooks had shown them on sentencing day. Ambassador Thompson, said the council speaker, its luminous tendrils moving too quickly to appear dignified, we have called this session to address mounting concerns regarding humanity's evacuation procedures. Kyle tilted his head. Concerns? The Vega representative flashed red through its crystal lattice. You are dismantling the gate network. Yes, Kyle said. A furry Centauran delegate slammed one paw against the table. Those gates connect the core systems. Kyle nodded sympathetically. They do. Without them, the delegate snapped, travel that once took hours now takes months. Kyle folded his hands. It's a regrettable inconvenience. Inconvenience? Another delegate burst out. Entire economies depend on those routes. The smile did not leave Kyle's face. And those routes depend on human gates. The council was quite firm in its view that human systems are destabilizing. We would never dream of leaving dangerous infrastructure behind. The room came apart. Voices crashed over one another in waves. Translators struggled to keep up. Chitin clattered. Fur rose. Light bodies flared. One gaseous ambassador expanded so fast its containment harness had to tighten with a hiss. Kyle sat through all of it as though attending a mildly tedious budget hearing. When the noise finally thinned enough for words to exist again, the council speaker leaned forward. You are removing more than transit systems. We are being thorough, Kyle said. The Ethetheran envoy drifted closer, its form trembling. Human medical networks are shutting down on mixed-species stations. Diagnostic arrays. Emergency trauma systems. Disease screening protocols. Those facilities serve millions of non-human patients. Kyle's eyes softened just enough to become insulting. We are deeply touched by your concern for shared welfare. That is not. Do not worry, Kyle went on. Where possible, we are leaving clear labels on anything that will stop functioning once our technicians depart. Across the table, a Zephron military liaison clicked his mandibles so hard the translator rendered the sound as static bursts. This evacuation is destroying galactic stability. Kyle's smile vanished. No, he said, and his voice cut cleanly through the chamber. Your vote did that. We are simply removing human civilization from council space, exactly as ordered. You wanted separation. This is what separation looks like. No one answered him. On Harvest Prime, Sarah Kim stood on a ridge overlooking fields that had once been called a miracle. Millions of square kilometers of engineered abundance spread to the horizon beneath a sky webbed with freight lines. This world had fed 12 member species during drought years, 23 during the fungal blights, 30 during the shipping collapses after the Perseus border wars. Sarah had spent 14 years here turning dead alien dirt into black, living soil that smelled enough like old earth rain to make settlers cry the first time they knelt in it. Now the fields were being harvested in reverse. Excavation towers rolled in geometric patterns across the land. Their broad intake mouths swallowed topsoil layer by careful layer, preserving bacterial chains, nutrient structures, and root webs inside compression vaults. Orchard lifters encased fruit trees in glowing cocoons and raised them whole from the ground. Irrigation intelligence hubs were unplugged from continental networks and loaded into transport barges. Even the reservoirs were being drained into mobile purity tanks. An Ethetheran observer floated beside Sarah, watching with the disbelieving stillness of something seeing a natural law break. You are taking the dirt, it said. Sarah checked a tablet without looking up. Yes. But, soil is not a machine. No, Sarah agreed. It's much harder to make. The observer flickered, struggling to stabilize its glow. This world lives because of that soil. Sarah finally looked at it. This world lived because humans made it live. Far below, a line of excavators cut through a valley that had once grown enough grain to calm food prices 3 sectors away. Dark earth rolled upward into containment fields, leaving pale mineral crust behind. You can't remove a biosphere, the observer whispered. Sarah pointed toward the machines. Looks like we can. At New Phoenix, Captain Kevin Martinez walked through a city that sounded like surgery. Demolition was the wrong word. Demolition was blunt. This was disassembly with memory. Towers came down in clean vertical slices as drones traced structural seams first laid by human architects decades earlier. Transit rails folded into modular chains. Water systems were drained, tagged, severed, and packed. Power plants were shut down only after portable grids were in place to keep evacuation districts stable. Every apartment block, school, hospital wing, plaza, generator, data stack, and tram spine was being taken apart by crews who had once sworn to maintain it forever. Kevin stood on an observation platform with his first officer, Janet Williams, and watched an entire residential tower rise from its foundations inside a molecular suspension field. Janet let out a breath. 50 million people built this place. Kevin nodded. And 50 million people are taking it with them. Below, families moved through orderly corridors toward embarkation gates. They carried bags, pets, folded flags, children half asleep against their shoulders. They passed public displays that no longer advertised local events or market updates. Now they showed routing times, docking assignments, medical checkpoints, freight windows. Nobody had to be told to keep moving. Everyone understood what every delay cost. A little boy near the platform stopped and pointed upward as the tower floated away in shimmering light. "Mom," he asked, "are we stealing our house?" His mother knelt, touched his cheek and said, "No, baby. We're bringing it home." Kevin looked away before the answer could do anything to his face. At Space Station Alpha, Chief Engineer Ryan Cooper pulled the final human access lattice from the main life support spine while half the station screamed through open channels. The station had been sold for years as a triumph of interspecies cooperation. Human sectors, alien sectors, shared sectors, cultural zones, trade decks, medical bays, arbitration halls. The brochures had called it a beacon. Ryan had called it a maintenance nightmare held together by 6,000 undocumented workarounds and the willingness of human engineers to keep fixing problems that were technically someone else's responsibility. Now the human sectors were sealing. A Zephron technician blocked his path in the engineering corridor, for arms spread wide. "If you remove that lattice, gravity stabilization in decks 9 through 14 will fail." Ryan held up the order pad. Human stabilization lattice. Human install. Human maintenance. Those decks house civilians. Ryan met the insectoid's faceted eyes. "Then your government should have voted like it remembered that." He keyed the release. Somewhere above them, alarms began to howl. Throughout council space, similar moments multiplied. Hospitals lost diagnostic clouds and reverted to crude triage. Banking worlds watched human algorithms withdraw from their markets, and numbers that had looked eternal began bleeding red across every exchange. Mining planets saw extraction systems folded into storage crates while collapsed shafts sealed away the crystals beneath them. Research stations went dark as human data vanished from shared servers. Schools emptied when human instructors left with curriculum cores. Translation meshes degraded one language at a time. The shock did not come from hatred. It came from intimacy. The galaxy was discovering that humanity had touched everything. By month 2, the first full shortages began. Food rationing hit outer colonies dependent on Harvest Prime shipments. Medical queues doubled on plague-struck worlds when human antiviral protocols disappeared from the standard treatment stacks. Freight insurers collapsed after Gregory Adams pulled every human-backed guarantee from the interstellar market. Merchant fleets found themselves trapped in systems where jump gates had once stood because no one else knew how to maintain the control arrays. Border patrols began missing pirate activity because translation lag between allied species had increased from seconds to hours. Every emergency message reached the council, and every answer was the same. Humanity is complying fully with your ruling. Late in the second month, another council session was called, though fewer delegates arrived this time. Too many routes were failing. Too many ships were delayed. Too many worlds had begun hoarding fuel and food to spare diplomats the trip. Kyle Thompson entered anyway, immaculate as ever. The council speaker looked older. Not physically. Structurally. Its luminous body had lost coherence around the edges, as if strain itself could blur a species made of light. "We wish to discuss amendments to the evacuation," it said. Kyle took his seat. "Do you?" The Vega ambassador leaned in. "Certain critical systems may remain under temporary council custodianship." Kyle blinked once. "No. Ambassador." "No," he repeated. The vote was unanimous. The sentence was permanent exile. "You were very clear that human presence, human influence, and human infrastructure constitute a danger. We are honoring that judgment." The Ethetheran representative dimmed. "Worlds are beginning to fail." Kyle's voice stayed soft. "I know." A hush spread across the room. For the first time since the trial, the council was no longer speaking from height. It was speaking from need. The speaker's tendrils folded low. "What do you want from us?" That was the wrong question, and Kyle knew they knew it as soon as it left their translator bands. He stood. What we wanted, he said, was respect. Equality. The same thing we offered everyone else for over a century. No one moved. Kyle looked around the chamber at the panicked displays, the failing route maps, the species too proud to say afraid though fear had entered every motion they made. You had that, he said. And you voted against it. Then he turned and walked out while behind him, across a galaxy that had mistaken generosity for weakness, the lights kept going out. By the 4th month, the galaxy had stopped asking whether humanity would really go through with it. That question belonged to an earlier, more comfortable era, back when officials still believed the crisis might be managed through diplomatic wording and procedural delay. Now the questions were uglier. How long until the outer food corridors failed completely? How many plague worlds could still maintain quarantine without human logistics? How many military fleets were stranded on the wrong side of dead gates? How many governments could survive another month of economic freefall? The Council was no longer debating human intent. It was trying to measure the speed of its own collapse. On the bridge of the Exodus, Admiral Nathan Torres watched the galaxy dim in layers. The ship was the largest structure ever built by human hands, a moving city wrapped in armor and command decks, its internal volume great enough to house whole neighborhoods during emergency transfer. Through the main observation wall, the fleet stretched across the stars in ordered silence. 10,000 vessels. Civilian transports, industrial haulers, mobile habitats, escort destroyers, colony lifters, archive ships, agricultural carriers, medical arcs, dismantling barges, science platforms, and the enormous compression freighters holding the bones of worlds humanity had built and refused to surrender. Captain Diana Rodriguez stood beside him at the tactical rail. Final regional reports are coming in. Nathan nodded. Read them. New Phoenix fully stripped and evacuated. Harvest Prime soil recovery at 98%. Space Station Alpha sealed and abandoned. Dire, 7 extraction systems recovered, mine shafts collapsed. Crimson Nebula and Gamma research stations scrubbed. Shared server deletion complete across all known Council-linked sectors. Last civilian lift from the border colonies is underway. Nathan listened without expression, but every line carried weight. Each report was another door closing behind the species that had once been told space could become a common home. And the gates? He asked. Diana brought up a new overlay. Across the star map, old human gate routes flickered in red and went dark one by one. 73% dismantled, she said. The remaining networks will fold over the next 12 days if there's no direct interference. Nathan studied the map. Before, those lines had looked like triumph. Bridges thrown across impossible distance. Proof that intelligence and will could make civilization faster than fear. Now they looked like veins being pulled from a body. Any military movement from the Council? Scattered, Diana said. No unified posture. Too many fleets are trapped without fast transit. A few local commanders are shadowing our routes, but nothing coordinated. Nathan let out a slow breath. They can still panic. They already have. Yes, he said. I'm waiting for panic to become desperation. On a patrol ship near the old Vega corridor, Captain James Miller received the coded signal at 0300 ship time. All units. Final transition protocol in 40 minutes. Prepare for dark sky. James read it twice, then looked up at the bridge crew. No one spoke. They had all known this order was coming. Still, knowing something and hearing it were different things. Outside the forward glass, the stars looked unchanged. That was the cruel part. Space could look serene while entire civilizations bled out beneath the surface. His communications officer broke the silence first. Sir, Vega Outpost Control is requesting clarification on why our navigation beacon support has gone offline. James took his seat. No response. Pause. Sir, they're repeating at priority level 1. They report freight collisions in the outer lane and... No response. The officer swallowed and muted the channel. James keyed open fleet-wide command. Human ships filled the board around him, each icon steady, disciplined, waiting. Bridge to all sections, he said. Stand by for stealth transition. Verify civilian bundles secure. Confirm guidance locked to beacon network. We go dark together. One by one, green confirmations lit across his display. At Earth's hidden assembly yards beyond Luna, the final pieces of Operation Breakaway came together behind layers of shield masking and false telemetry. Dr. Charles Young stood inside a cavernous generator chamber staring up at one of the quantum bridge cores as energy moved through it like trapped weather. The structure was larger than many moonside cities, all nested rings and field anchors, built in secret over months of apparent evacuation labor. To anyone watching resource reports from outside, it would have looked like overproduction for transport support. Only a handful of people on Earth had known the truth. Humanity had never intended merely to retreat. Nina Patel crossed the catwalk toward him with a data slate tight in one hand. Field harmonics are holding across all test nodes. Charles took the slate. Variance. Below projected threshold. He read the numbers, then read them again. The void between galactic arms had been treated by every known species as a boundary. Empty, unstable, uncrossable. A dark ocean where sensors lied and ships vanished. Human mathematicians had disagreed years ago, quietly, in papers dismissed as brilliant fantasy by council science boards that preferred the universe neat and already understood. Then the exile vote had come and fantasy had become necessity. If this works, Nina said softly, they'll never find us. Charles handed back the slate. That's the idea. At the Galactic Council Capitol, alarms had become part of the architecture. They no longer made delegates jump. They simply layered over everything, another system cry in a building full of failing systems. The grand chamber was half lit when the emergency session began. Several light arrays were dead. Environmental control on 2 gallery levels had failed earlier in the day. 3 delegates were attending remotely because they could no longer secure transport. The irony of the Capitol itself beginning to break down without human maintenance was not lost on anyone. The speaker opened the session with no ceremony. We have lost contact with 14 outer systems. The words hit the chamber like debris. The Rigelian delegate slammed both forelimbs against the table. Because your office delayed compromise. The Ethetheran envoy flared with sickly light. Because compromise should have happened before the sentencing. The Vega representative flashed so violently its internal fractures showed. This is not the time for assigning blame. It is exactly the time, another delegate snapped. My worlds are starving. Voices rose. Translators lagged. Several systems stuttered under the load, turning arguments into broken fragments. In another age the dysfunction might have seemed absurd. Now it felt like prophecy. Then the chamber doors opened. Ambassador Kyle Thompson entered to a silence so sudden it felt frightened. He walked to the center position, looked around the room and saw it at once. The missing polish. The dimmer lights. The strain marks on faces that had once projected superiority as effortlessly as breathing. They looked like people surviving weather now, not shaping it. The speaker spoke first. Ambassador Thompson. We request immediate discussion regarding humanitarian exceptions. Kyle lifted one brow. Exceptions. Yes. Temporary retention of selected systems. Medical, agricultural, navigational. No. The word landed flat and absolute. The speaker's tendrils twitched. You did not hear the full proposal. I heard enough. A Verdanian delegate leaned forward, leaves edged brown with stress. Children are dying on outlying worlds because food shipments cannot arrive. Kyle looked at the being for a long second. When he answered, his voice was quiet. Human children are spending their nights packing their homes into cargo fields because your governments voted to erase their future. No one spoke. Another delegate tried a different angle. Perhaps the evacuation timetable can be extended. For safety. Kyle almost smiled. You gave us 6 months. That was before the consequences became clear. For the first time, anger showed through his composure. They were clear to us, he said. The chamber recoiled at the sharpness in that sentence. Not because he raised his voice. Because he did not. Back on the Exodus, Nathan received the final synchronized countdown. All sectors ready. Dark sky on my mark. Across thousands of systems, human crews moved to their stations. Civilian ships sealed their ports. Beacon craft aligned in hidden channels. Patrol vessels armed stealth matrices. Medical platforms closed external care bays forever. Weather control satellites handed over the last stable cycles they would ever provide. Mining stations purged coordinates. Data relays blanked identity trails. Across human space, a civilization prepared to become untraceable. Nathan stood. Transmit the order, he said. Diana's hand hovered over the command plane for a fraction of a second. Then she pressed it. On James Miller's ship, the stealth grid came alive with a sound like air being folded. Stars bent across the hull. Light slid wrong. Sensor echoes unraveled. One moment his vessel existed on every military board in the sector. The next it became absence. All ships report invisible to passive and active scan, his tactical officer whispered. Good, James said. Hold formation. On the council chamber displays, human fleet markers began disappearing. Not moving. Vanishing. Rows at a time. Sector by sector. Cargo clusters. Civilian convoys. Escort formations. Colony transports. Medical arcs. Warships. All gone. The tactical board emptied in front of the assembled delegates. The speakers stared at the screen as though it had become a hole in reality. Where are they? No one answered. Because for the first time since the sentencing, the council understood the size of what it had done. It had not merely driven humanity out. It had pushed a species built on adaptation, invention, and memory into the dark with every reason never to come back. And now that species had disappeared on purpose. The void did not look empty. That was the first thing the children noticed as humanity's fleet reached the edge of the known galaxy. Adults had expected darkness, a black gulf between spiral arms, a dead place where light thinned into nothing. Instead the darkness moved. Not with life. With structure. Veils of cold radiation drifted across distances too large for the mind to hold. Faint rivers of charged dust curved through the black like ghost currents. Remote stars burned so far apart they looked less like a map and more like forgotten thoughts. On the observation deck of the science vessel Horizon, Dr. Charles Young stood before the forward glass and watched the quantum bridge generators align around the fleet. Each generator was the size of a small moon. Humanity had built them in secret during the evacuation, hiding their materials inside transport manifests, disassembly budgets, and industrial recovery quotas. To the council they had looked like oversized compression anchors. To Charles, they were the answer to every smug voice that had called human physics reckless simply because it went further than comfort allowed. Nina Patel stepped up beside him, her eyes bright with exhaustion and disbelief. All generator rings are in position. Charles nodded without looking away. Ahead of them, the generator array unfolded in perfect mathematical symmetry. Huge structures rotating until their field anchors locked on invisible coordinates derived from equations no Council Academy had ever taken seriously. Begin initialization, he said. Across the fleet, the generators woke. At first it was subtle. Thin lines of pale blue light along the generator rims. A low vibration through the deck plating. Then space itself began to react. Darkness ahead of the armada shivered as though touched from beneath. The black between the stars tightened, folded, stretched. Light from distant suns bent into curved bands. The void stopped looking like distance and started looking like fabric pulled by invisible hands. On the Exodus, Admiral Nathan Torres watched the phenomenon bloom across every tactical display. Field integrity? He asked. Captain Diana Rodriguez read from her console without blinking. Holding across all nodes. Phase variance within safe limits. Bridge stability? Improving. Around him, his crew stood in silence. No one wanted to be the first to speak over history. The Council had spent months believing humanity's disappearance was a trick of stealth. A temporary vanishing act. A military concealment. They would never imagine this. That while the galaxy was collapsing behind them, the species it had exiled was opening a road into a place everyone else had called impossible. On Horizon, the instruments spiked so sharply that several junior technicians forgot to breathe. Nina looked from her board to the glass. Charles. He saw it too. A tunnel was forming. Not a hole punched through space. Something stranger. A corridor of bent geometry, woven out of controlled quantum distortion and stabilized by harmonics that should not have held but did. The black ahead split into layers of impossible depth. Colors no human language had precise words for flashed and vanished inside the distortion. The passage reached outward into the void like a path through folded reality. My God, Nina whispered. Charles let out one slow breath. It works. The bridge was invisible to any system not keyed to human field logic. No emissions a council array would interpret correctly. No signature matching known transit technology. To everyone they had left behind, the void would remain an empty grave. To humanity, it had just become a doorway. Nathan opened fleet-wide command. All vessels, he said, and his voice carried across 10,000 ships filled with tired families, packed cities, dismantled worlds, seed banks, data archives, and the stubborn memory of every insult that had pushed them here. Prepare for void entry. Maintain formation. Follow your assigned beacon ships. No deviations. Acknowledgements rolled back in disciplined waves. On one civilian carrier, a mother lifted her daughter so she could see through the observation port as the first beacon ships entered the tunnel. The child pressed both hands to the glass. Is that where we live now? Her mother looked at the impossible corridor, at the fleet moving toward darkness no human had ever crossed, and answered the only way she could. It's where we're going to begin. One by one the ships entered. From the outside it looked almost gentle. Vast hulls crossing the threshold and vanishing into warped light. Cargo arcs carrying cities. Agricultural vessels loaded with living soil. Medical ships holding entire hospital systems. Patrol destroyers sliding into the corridor like sharks into deep water. Then the next wave. And the next. Thousands upon thousands of ships disappearing into a road humanity had built out of mathematics and refusal. Inside the bridge, the universe lost all habit. Captain Helen Ross guided one of the lead beacon ships through geometries that seemed to unfold faster than thought. The stars outside no longer obeyed linear distance. Color moved in sheets. Time did not break, but it felt as if it bent around perception, stretching moments thin and snapping them back into shape. Her hands stayed steady on the flight controls. Beacon alignment good, her navigator reported. Convoy 3 is holding formation. Keep them centered, Helen said. No drift toward the outer fold. The journey would take 3 weeks ship time. 3 weeks inside a corridor that no alien science board would have believed could exist. 3 weeks carrying the last intact remnant of old human civilization toward something with no guarantee except the work behind it. Back in council space, the collapse deepened. Without human translators, emergency sessions broke into confusion as species reverted to partial understanding and mistranslated intent. Without banking architecture, entire trade blocks froze when asset verification chains failed. Without medical platforms, plague worlds began sending casualty projections instead of treatment requests because they no longer knew who could help them. Agricultural failures spread outward from world to world as hybrid crop systems died and no one remembered how to replace them. Frontier sectors vanished from contact when relay networks and jump routes failed together. The galaxy was not falling in a single dramatic moment. It was fragmenting. Connection by connection. Habit by habit. Assumption by assumption. 3 weeks later, the fleet emerged. It happened in stages. Beacon ships first, slipping from the mouth of the quantum corridor into open space and immediately painting the unknown with survey grids. Then the great transports. Then the carriers, escorts, habitat arcs, and freight leviathans. Humanity spilled from the bridge into a new galaxy and stopped, for a moment, because even prepared minds were not equal to wonder. 3 suns burned ahead. One blue-white. One gold. One deep orange. Their lights braided across space, painting the nearby worlds in strange shifting color. 12 habitable planets circled within survey range alone. Atmosphere stable. Water signatures strong. Biospheres active. No evidence of advanced military threat. No council markers. No ancient claims. No courtroom waiting at the far end of the journey. Just room. On the bridge of the Exodus, silence held for 2 full seconds before the survey team began talking all at once. Scans confirmed 12 viable worlds in system. Multiple mineral-rich belts. Native life present, pre-industrial at most on outer moons. Radiation balance within habitable tolerance. Nathan looked toward President Garcia as the reports flooded in. She stood near the main display with tears in her eyes and did not hide them. We made it, she said. Humanity's fleet spread out under triple suns. Mobile habitats took orbit. Industrial ships began unpacking compressed infrastructure. Agricultural vessels descended to test Earth's soil beneath alien skies. Engineering crews marked settlement zones. Archive ships brought down libraries and universities. Medical stations deployed full care networks before the first permanent homes even landed. Children stepped onto worlds no exile order had named. Farmers opened containers holding dirt gathered from lost colonies and let it fall into the wind of a place no human ancestor had ever imagined. The first city rose faster than anyone thought possible because it had already existed once. New Phoenix became something else beneath 3 stars. Not a replica. A continuation. Towers reassembled. Transit webs unfolded. Water systems rooted into fresh ground. Orchard cocoons opened. Schools were rebuilt from memory cores. Hospitals came online. Public squares filled with people who had spent months inside ships carrying the remains of their lives and were suddenly standing beneath a sky that belonged to nobody but those willing to build under it. Then the communications team detected local signals. Primitive. Curious. Repeating. 3 native species across nearby systems, none advanced enough to threaten, all advanced enough to answer. Garcia stood on the command deck as the translators calibrated from raw pattern logic, and when the first stable channel opened, she did not hesitate. Open it, she said. An image formed. A being like a land-dwelling dolphin, bright-eyed and cautious, surrounded by others of its kind. You came from the dark between galaxies, it said through the newborn translation stream. How? Garcia looked through the bridge glass at the triple suns, at the ships still arriving, at the worlds waiting to be named by people who had been told they had no place left in the universe. Then she smiled. We'll be happy to tell you, she said, but first let us introduce ourselves properly. 6 months after the vote, the Galactic Council chamber looked like something history had already abandoned. The crystal arches still rose toward the ceiling. The ceremonial floor still reflected what light remained, The banners of 212 species still hung in careful rows around the chamber. But the illusion was gone. Whole sections of the ceiling were dark where maintenance lattices had failed. The translation grid flickered badly enough that every third sentence arrived with static cracks inside it. Environmental stabilizers on the upper tiers had died 2 days earlier, and several delegations now sat in portable field bubbles brought from home because the chamber itself could no longer reliably sustain them. It was fitting, Quelix thought, that the room where humanity had been condemned now struggled to keep its own air balanced. The young Alterian researcher stood in the observer gallery with a data crystal clutched so tightly in one translucent hand that light bent through the edges of his fingers. He wasn't supposed to be here. The seats were reserved for official aides, policy archivists, diplomatic recorders. But nothing in the capital worked properly anymore, and the collapse of systems had open doors protocol once kept sealed. Quelix had walked in carrying the records no one wanted to read until it was too late. Below him, the speaker floated at the chamber's center, visibly dimmer than the being recorded in older council archives. Its tendrils moved with exhaustion now, not authority. Trade in Sector 7 has fully collapsed, the Rigelian delegate reported through a failing translator. Merchant vessels cannot complete routes without gate access. Fuel reserves are gone. 3 colony chains have entered famine conditions. The Vega representative's crystal body, once bright enough to cast hard blue light across the table, had gone dull at the core. 12 of our medical worlds now report uncontrollable plague spread. Human sequencing methods cannot be replicated. Our physicians are losing containment. The Zephron delegate clicked its mandibles in visible agitation. Outer agricultural colonies have begun riots. Native crops fail in modified soil, and no one remembers the old nutrient cycling protocols. One by one the reports came. Food collapse. Medical collapse. Transit failure. Banking failure. Communications failure. Weather instability on terraformed worlds. Piracy on abandoned trade lanes. Research blackouts. Manufacturing paralysis. A civilization that had once thought itself eternal now sounded like a building reading its own fractures aloud. No one even argued anymore. That was what frightened Quelix most. In the old recordings, the council had always found energy for blame, pride, deflection, moral speeches. Today there was only erosion. Every voice in the chamber carried the same exhausted knowledge. They had not exiled a threat. They had amputated the hands that held their world together. The speaker let the last report fade, then spoke with terrible softness. We must try again to contact Earth. A bitter noise passed through the room. How? Asked the Verdanian delegate. Its leaves were dry at the edges. The jump routes are dead. Their ships vanished from our sensors months ago. Our deep scans find nothing. We send a message into the void, the speaker insisted. An apology. A formal request for return. A reversal of sentence. The Draxi representative let out a sound too harsh for laughter and too tired for anger. Reversal? Its scales rattled with contempt directed mostly at itself. We condemned them unanimously. We watched them strip the galaxy bare and still believed they might come back if we chose the right wording. A long silence followed. From the gallery, Quelix looked down at the chamber and felt the weight of the data crystal in his hand. He had spent the last month in the historical archives reading everything the council had ignored. Human economic models mapping dependency chains that stretched farther than any delegate had admitted. Medical records showing human clinics on alien worlds treating patients without charge because no one else could. Engineering logs documenting repairs to failing foreign systems performed quietly by human crews who had asked for nothing but access and cooperation. Education grants. Agricultural rescue missions. Disaster relief fleets. Translator upgrades. Power stabilizations. Wormhole corrections. Whole centuries of labor offered in good faith, dismissed as ambition whenever it became too visible. He had found something else too. A speech by a human philosopher delivered decades before the vote, archived and forgotten. The line still echoed in his mind. The strongest bridge in the galaxy is the one no one notices until it burns. At the far end of the chamber, a salvage captain rose to speak. Captain Vrex had returned days earlier from New Haven, one of the empty human colony worlds now stripped down to bare ground and weathered foundations. We found one thing, Vrex said. Every eye turned toward him. The captain held up a hollow slate. It shook in his grip. In the central square of the abandoned city, the humans left a monument. Nothing else. No machines. No databases. No hidden supplies. Just words. A hush fell over the chamber. Vrex activated the slate. Above the council table appeared a carved stone standing alone in an empty plaza under a pale sky. Across its face, translated into 100 scripts, ran the message humanity had chosen to leave behind. You feared us because we dared to dream. You exiled us because we refused to bow. We leave you with the galaxy you wanted. One without human ambition, human innovation, human hope. May you find it to your liking. No one moved. The chamber held that message the way a wound holds cold. Quelix felt something in him give way. Not because the words were cruel. Because they weren't. They were calm. Final. The tone of a species that had already judged the matter closed and moved on to build where it was welcomed. Below, the speaker's tendrils drooped lower. We were wrong, it said. The sentence barely carried across the room, yet it landed heavier than any verdict. The Vega representative bowed its crystalline head. Yes. The Ethetheran envoy dimmed until it was almost smoke. We called them dangerous because they changed everything they touched. And they did, said Quelix before he realized he had spoken. The words left him from the gallery and fell into the chamber below. Heads turned upward. Officials stared. Protocol should have silenced him. No one had strength left for protocol. Quelix stepped forward to the rail, data crystal shining in his hand. They changed everything, he said louder now, because everything they touched worked better afterward. His voice shook then steadied. I read the records you ignored. Human doctors saved worlds that hated them. Human engineers maintained systems that were never theirs. Human scientists shared discoveries freely. Human teachers trained generations who later voted to exile them. They asked for equality. They asked for respect. We answered with fear. No one interrupted. Now we sit in failing light, breathing recycled air through broken systems, and call it tragedy as though it arrived from nowhere. Quelix lifted the crystal slightly. It did not. We chose it. Across the chamber, faces lowered one by one. Outside, another section of the capital grid failed. The chamber lights flickered hard enough to plunge everyone into darkness for a full second before emergency strips came on in weak amber lines along the floor. In that brief dark, Quelix imagined what the humans must be seeing now. Not this chamber. Not dead gates. Not pleading messages cast into silence. He imagined 3 suns over new cities. Human children laughing in streets that no exile order could reach. Fields planted in stolen soil under alien skies. New allies greeted with open hands and equal terms. A young civilization rising stronger precisely because the old one had tried to cage it. When the lights returned, dim and tired, the speaker had nothing left to say. Neither did anyone else. The council sat in the fading chamber while the monument's words glowed above them and the truth settled into every silence like ash. They had wanted a galaxy without humans. Now they had one. Far beyond the dead routes and broken systems, beyond the reach of apology, beyond the last maps this chamber still trusted, humanity lived beneath 3 suns and built a future among those who welcomed them. And in the end, that was the cruelest part. The exile had not broken them. It had set them free.